Harry Potter, and by extension the wider wizarding world, hasn't always been something that I was interested in. Around 22 years ago, the first Harry Potter movie was released, and during that same year, the first Lord of the Rings movie came out as well. I didn't dislike Harry Potter, but I was much more interested in the Lord of the Rings, as were all of my friends at the time, so I never really engaged with any part of the Harry Potter IP. A few years down the line, I met my current partner, and she was heavily into the Wizarding World stuff since pretty much the very beginning. Over time, I ended up watching all of the movies, I read the first 2 books, and I gradually began to build up an appreciation for the story, the characters, and the franchise overall. So as you might imagine, we were very happy to see the announcement of Hogwarts Legacy, a beautiful, fully fledged, open-world action RPG set in a world that we love. This game, in my opinion, is absolutely brilliant. I wouldn't call it a perfect game though, as there are some small issues that I have with it, but I will admit they're basically just personal preferences or minor nitpicks at worst. I honestly think it looks good, it runs well, there's lots to do, exploration is rewarding, the RPG progression is pretty cool, and the combat is rather enjoyable. That being said, I don't think anything Hogwarts Legacy offers is the best in its class. For example, graphically, it isn't the best looking game in the world, but when you consider it as a complete package, as a complete product, it is mightily impressive. It's an engrossing single-player game that works as intended on day one, and I think that I can say, without a doubt, that Hogwarts Legacy is the game that fans have been waiting for over 20 long years. So what is Hogwarts Legacy? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's an open-world action RPG set in the Harry Potter universe. This time though, you won't be running into Hermione, Snape, or Harry himself for that matter, as this game takes place all the way back in the 1800s. The Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry has existed for a very long time within the lore, and as such, would have multiple generations of teachers and students alike. Choosing to go back in time like this has given the developers at Avalanche Studios the freedom to play with the world, but also have the game be totally self-contained, outside of a few minor references. As usual, I won't be spoiling the story for anyone, but I will give you the basic setup. At the beginning of the game, you'll find yourself at the character creation screen. Here, you'll be able to create your custom Hogwarts student in any way that you want from a variety of options. All the usual stuff is present, of course: hairstyles, facial features, eye color, and a few extra options for those that want them. I wasn't able to make the character look anything like me, to be honest, outside of the hairstyle, but I ended up wearing a mask anyway, so it's not really a big deal. After embarking on your journey, you'll find yourself in the company of Professor Fig, a well-respected teacher who's been helping you with your magic lessons outside of school. In this game, you start as a 5th year student who's been admitted to Hogwarts rather late, and so Professor Fig has been helping you to catch up on your studies. During the trip to Hogwarts, Professor Fig makes a quick stop to speak with a friend from the Ministry of Magic named George Osric. George has some concerns about a recent goblin uprising, and it was Professor Fig's wife, Miriam, who informed George of the situation before she died. Unfortunately, that conversation is cut short, and Professor Fig is forced to apparate you and himself to safety. For those of you who might not know what that is, apparition is essentially magical teleportation. After a somewhat lengthy tutorial, you and the professor finally arrive at the fabled school itself. As a brand new student, the sorting hat will need to determine which house you'll belong to: Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, or of course Gryffindor. The hat may actually sort you into a house that you don't really want to be in, but worry not, you can simply choose your preferred house if you want to. I myself went for Slytherin, but really the only notable differences within the houses are the colours that you wear, the common room that you live in, and one quest that has a variant. Aside from that, everyone's playthrough will be largely similar in terms of story and questlines. It probably goes without saying, but Hogwarts Legacy's basic foundation is pretty similar to other open world games. You can of course explore the school itself, which is incredibly detailed, but you'll also have the ability to explore the nearby town of Hogsmeade and the much larger surrounding areas. At first you'll be running around on foot, but after a while you'll gain access to a broom which, as you might expect, allows you to fly virtually anywhere you want. You'll also get access to different mounts, some of which can fly and some of which cannot. However, I don't want to spoil them for you here, so I won't. As you explore the school and the wider world, you'll notice many of the common elements that you'd expect to find in most open world games. There's fast travel points, small towns or settlements with shops, activities to complete, enemies to defeat, gear to obtain, and collectibles to uncover. When you're not in the middle of a quest, you're absolutely free to roam around and do whatever you'd like. In fact, once you get your first broom, you could potentially fly around the entire map, unlocking all of the fast travel locations if you want to. I did exactly that, so I know you can do it. The game's world is much larger and far more varied than you'd think, and gives the player a good amount of stuff to do. The same is true for Hogwarts Castle itself. It's a labyrinthian maze of corridors, rooms, and staircases with an ungodly amount of secrets to find. Luckily, there are fast travel points around the castle as well, and on top of that, the minimap will help you and guide you to where you need to be. If you need a little extra help, you can press up on the D-pad to send out a guiding trail of light if you prefer. It's worth pointing out that by pressing left on the D-pad, you can use a spell called Revelio, which scans the surrounding area, allowing you to see points of interest, collectibles, and objects that you can interact with. Now, you can just explore the game's world without any real goal in mind, just seeing where your curiosity takes you. However, the vast majority of your time will be spent completing quests, be they main or side. I'm not sure I really need to explain how this all works, but in short, you can only have one quest active at a time, and unless you're doing something important, you can usually pick and choose what you want to do at any given time. Completing quests allows your character to gain XP and level up, which in turn allows them to take on more quests and equip stronger gear. Considering that Hogwarts is a school, you might be wondering how the classrooms and lessons factor into the gameplay. Well, they're categorized as side quests, and some of the main quests require you to learn specific spells in order to start them. That means that if you attempt to start a main quest without learning a specific spell from a side quest, you simply won't be able to start that main quest. Thankfully, it will tell you which spell you need to learn and from who. Simply activate the side quest in your menus and follow the markers to the classroom. Once there, you'll usually be treated to some sort of cutscene, followed by a small minigame that unlocks a spell for you to use. There are quite a few spells of different types to unlock, but we'll talk about those when we get to the combat section. So, how do the RPG mechanics and character progression systems work? Well, as I said earlier, completing quests and defeating enemies will give you XP, which levels up your character. The current max level is 40, and it's important to know that quests and gear are level gated. Your custom character has 3 stats: health, defense, and offense. The various pieces of gear that you buy or loot in the game each have their own stats, which are added to yours when they're equipped. A nice new cloak might give you plus 10 defense, for example, and on top of that, every piece can be upgraded and also slotted with a trait that grants a passive bonus. Upgrading gear and adding traits isn't available from the start, but you'll gain access to those options later on in the story. Sometimes the best gear you have might not always look the best or be to your tastes. Luckily, every single piece of gear you find gets added to your collection, allowing you to change the appearance of whatever you're wearing into anything that you've already obtained. During the early parts of the game, you'll actually be able to design your own wand as well. It's purely a visual thing, but as you progress through the game, you'll find additional handles that can be attached to it for even more customization. Another helpful feature is that you can hide parts of your clothes that you don't like. Say you find a hat that you don't think looks very good, but it's one of the strongest things you have. You simply find the hat in your gear section and click the hide option. Now, you get all of the benefits of the item without sacrificing your visual appeal. Besides leveling up and equipping gear, one of the main progression systems lies within the challenge screen. There are 5 challenge sections in total, and by fulfilling their conditions, you'll be able to unlock exclusive cosmetic options for your gear that can't be found anywhere else in the game. Along the top of the menu screen, you'll probably notice another tab marked Talents. A little way into the game, you'll unlock the ability to gain and spend talent points. You only get a total of 35 talent points for your character, and there are 48 talents to choose from, so it's worth reading what they do before you start unlocking them. I don't believe there's any way to respec these talent choices at the moment, but I imagine it could be patched in somewhere down the road. The talents themselves are relatively simple and generally support a few different playstyles such as Dark Wizard, Stealth, or just your core abilities, for example. Build crafting isn't really that deep in this game, but if you were to pair Dark Wizard talents and core talents together, then slot traits into your gear that buffs dark magic, you'd probably end up as a decently powerful witch or wizard. Next, let's break down how combat works so that it's easy to understand. It's actually a rather stripped-back system that gives you great results without having to learn complicated button inputs or deeper concepts like debuffs and small parry windows. Aside from stepping forward slightly, your character is, for the most part, rooted to the floor while attacking. Tapping the right trigger produces your basic attack, which is a somewhat weak rapid-fire 4-hit combo. To complement that basic attack, which is always available by the way, you'll have access to stronger spells that you've learned throughout the game. You can use spells like Incendio to set enemies on fire, Leviosa to lift them up in the air, making them defenseless, and Accio to drag distant foes towards you. Each combat spell has its own color, either red, purple, or yellow, and some of the stronger enemies in the game have a shield in one of those same colors. The idea is to hit them with a spell of the matching color, which will break it instantly and open them up to your attacks. You do of course have other spells of different colors, including white utility spells that can light up dark areas or turn you invisible, but they're not actually used during combat. You can equip 4 combat spells to your controller's face buttons, which can be cast by holding down the right trigger and then pressing the button it's mapped to. As a new student, you'll only have access to one set of 4 at the start, but as time goes on, you'll gain 3 more sets which can all be set up differently and switch between at any time. So that's how you attack, but how do you defend? Well, I'd imagine that fans of the franchise would be familiar with the Protego spell. It's sort of like a parry that a witch or wizard performs with their wand. You see it quite a lot in the movies actually. That said, it doesn't always look the same in the movies, I don't think, so I'm not 100% sure if it's always a Protego spell or just a simple deflection. Regardless though, in the game you'll notice a prompt appear on the screen whenever an attack is inbound. On PlayStation, it's either going to be triangle or circle that you need to press, and each one has a different result. If the prompt is circle, then simply tapping circle will have your character dodge roll out of harm's way. This can be upgraded to a quick teleportation, which can be activated by holding circle down instead of tapping it. On the other hand, if the prompt is triangle, your character will stand their ground and deflect the attack using Protego. Much like the dodge, this defensive ability can also be upgraded, allowing you to counterattack with a stupefy spell that stuns the target. All you need to do is hold triangle instead of tapping it to do so. Lastly, your character can somehow use ancient and powerful magic that not even the teachers at Hogwarts quite understand. In terms of a gameplay mechanic, this ancient magic acts as an ultimate ability. It utterly destroys any smaller enemy in one strike and deals heavy damage to larger targets. This attack has a meter that builds up during battle, and when it's ready you simply press L1 and R1 together at the same time to unleash it. There's also a few consumable potions and items that you can use during a fight if you're so inclined, and you'll be able to create these yourself within the Room of Requirement. You may remember from the films that the Room of Requirement is a special place within the Hogwarts castle that appears to those who need it most, and also it configures itself to whatever it is that you need. In the films, it gave Harry and the rest of the DA a place to train and practice their magical skills in order to protect themselves from the danger that they knew was coming. In Hogwarts Legacy, it becomes an entire, fully equipped home base that you can customize and make use of its many features. First of all, you can visually customize every aspect of the room, from the theme to the decor to where your utilities are placed. As you play the game, you'll naturally obtain some unidentified items, but luckily you have a desk in your room that you can use to identify them all at once for no cost. You've also got a loom that acts as an upgrade station for your gear, a herbology station to grow plants, and a brewing station that, unsurprisingly, allows you to brew your own potions. Brewing potions and growing plants takes real in-game time, which means that you might need to wait 30 seconds for something to be ready, or maybe even 15 minutes depending on what you're making or growing. There are hundreds of decoration items like candle stands, chairs, tables, wall hangings, statues, portraits, and tons more, which is a good thing considering that the Room of Requirement expands as you complete more of a certain questline. One of the room's biggest features is the multiple vivariums that can be used to house and raise a selection of fantastic beasts. You can find and capture these beasts out in the open world, then raise them, feed them, brush them, and yes, even breed them. There's also an entirely new range of customization items for these areas that focus on outdoor objects and vegetation, things like stone benches or trees, for example. You can even find Pokemon-style shinies in the wild, which are essentially rare color swaps of the various available beasts. Now, that was a lot of information to get, which does make sense as this is a rather dense video game, but now, let's quickly go over performance and then we'll get into my personal opinions for those that might be interested. So I played this on a PlayStation 5 and I used the performance mode option for the entire playthrough. That mode gives you 1440p and targets 60 FPS, which in my experience it maintained very well. Console versions of the game have 5 video modes, which are Fidelity, Fidelity with Ray Tracing, Performance, Balanced, and HRF Performance. Fidelity gives you a locked 30 FPS at an upsampled 1800p. The ray tracing mode I'm not 100% sure on. It seems to be the same as normal fidelity mode but with added ray tracing, but that kind of begs the question, if it's the same then why split it into two modes? Performance mode you already know about, and then we have balanced mode which gives you a locked 40 FPS and a locked 1800p. Lastly, you've got HRF mode, which stands for high frame rate and is only available for TVs that support VRR, variable refresh rate. That setting can usually produce around 80 FPS at 1080p in most cases, so you do have a lot of options to mess with. In terms of bugs and glitches, I only ever saw some very minor visual problems, which were mostly to do with bright daylight and shadows. I noticed some flickering light in various places, and some of the light sources would vanish entirely depending on where your character was standing and your distance from it. I didn't have any crashes at all, which is great, and nothing within the game like quests were broken or incomplete. Everything basically worked as intended for me, and I have to say that's something I don't get to say too often with modern AAA games. Hogwarts Legacy is out now on PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and PC. The PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch versions of the game will be arriving at a later date, and physical copies are available for all consoles. So, what did I personally think of the game? Well, as the title of the video says, I really do think that this is an absolute triumph. A lot of people, myself included, were worried that this was going to be far too, I guess, ambitious and would probably release in a sort of Cyberpunk 2077 situation. I'm happy to say that the version I played was close to flawless. I mean, yeah, you've got a couple of visual glitches and the frame rate wasn't locked at 60, but other than that, I think it's a great game. It's just undeniably solid. It's got a highly detailed world that's packed full of things to find, places to explore, and quests to complete. The environments are, of course, rather pretty to look at, but what really impressed me was the design and the sheer density of Hogwarts Castle. Considering how many RPGs have broken quests and progression bugs and things like that, I find it incredible that this game tracks so many things across these complicated and interconnected areas. There's so many secret places to discover, minor side activities to complete, and aside from some brief loading moments as you move through certain doors, it's all rather seamless. You don't get an actual loading screen or anything, it just makes you wait a few seconds at a couple of doors here and there. I would assume that it's just loading the areas of the castle in large chunks, and if so, that would explain it. It's just overall a very well-rounded, well-made, and complete product, which I have no problem recommending. I've seen a surprising amount of people say that they enjoyed this game despite not even caring about Harry Potter, which is pretty great to hear. And have you seen the numbers it's doing on Steam and Twitch? It's doing incredibly well, to say the least, and frankly, I think it deserves it. Now, I've given the game a lot of praise, and I'd say rightly so. However, it's not all sunshine and roses for me personally. I have no doubt that this will be a strong Game of the Year contender, but there are a few, shall we say, minor elements that I didn't quite mesh with, or that I think could have been done a little bit better. So first of all, I wasn't actually that interested in the story or characters, and I kinda hate to say that. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't watching the cutscenes and, just hating what I was seeing. I just didn't really find it to be particularly compelling, aside from a couple of very dark moments which were excellent. I guess it's kinda like the Fantastic Beasts movies. They are most definitely Wizarding World movies, but their narrative just doesn't contain that much to write home about. I think the best story of this universe has already been told in the original 6 books and 7 films, so anything else that comes along now probably won't feel quite as good by comparison. That is, of course, a subjective thing to say, but I thought the story of Hogwarts Legacy was perfectly fine and it does what it needs to do. However, that's firmly where it stays. Pretty much all of my complaints, if you can even call them that, are minor at worst, and the next example of that is the game's puzzles. Now, there are some puzzles out in the open world and in the castle that are very quick to deal with. Things like the math doors and the butterfly mirrors can be completed in something like 30 seconds. But during the story, you go through a few dungeons, I guess you could call them. I'm trying not to spoil anything, but basically you have to get through multiple dungeon type levels throughout the game. And while they do contain combat encounters as well, they also have a ton of puzzle-based progression. They aren't exactly difficult puzzles, that's not really the issue I have, it's just how many of them there are and how long they take to complete. I suspect that this won't bother most players, but obviously I can't speak for them, I can only speak for myself. Puzzles just aren't really my thing personally in games. I actually quit playing Immortals Phoenix Rising about halfway through for the same reason, and it's why I got bored with Breath of the Wild within about 6 hours. I think Hogwarts Legacy has just a tad too many instances where completing a puzzle is the only way to proceed. Cut those specific puzzles by, I don't know, maybe 40% or something like that, and I'd be more than happy. Lastly, the combat in this game is an enjoyable highlight, and luckily there's a lot of it. That being said, there's one mechanic that I feel could have been implemented in a way that would help to smooth it out and make it feel even better than it already does. I mentioned it earlier, but you can have 4 spells equipped to the 4 face buttons and then unlock 3 more sets of 4 that you can customize and then switch between. I kind of feel like the game should have had a weapon wheel, or perhaps more accurately, a spell wheel. Considering how the controls are mapped, it probably wouldn't make sense to put every single spell that you can get into one wheel. But what you could do is have the wheel contain your 4 custom sets of spells. I think time should slow down or stop when using this wheel, and I think switching spell sets this way would be less cumbersome overall. It's not that the current setup doesn't work or anything, it works fine and I only had very minor annoyances with it, but I think going with the wheel option would have made the whole switching process quicker and smoother during all combat situations. In my opinion, Hogwarts Legacy is a brilliant RPG set in a beloved fantasy universe, and I would 100% recommend it to anyone who has the slightest interest in playing it. Maybe you aren't even into Harry Potter, but you just enjoy playing open world games. I still think this is worth looking into and could very well be one of the best open world games of all time. I won't say the best because I'm sure we all have our own preferences, but that said, I think this is visually superb, fun to play, and a complete joy to explore. Ultimately, Hogwarts Legacy demonstrates how all AAA games should release. It's been produced and created with the utmost care and meticulous attention to detail. That much is obvious and evident no matter how you look at it. It's a single-player game without microtransactions, loot boxes, or a live service business model, which, once again, proves that the greed these companies display is a want rather than a need. At this point, nothing more needs to be said. It's an excellent video game and, dare I say, a magical experience that, in my opinion, is worth every penny of its asking price. If you enjoyed this particular video, I hope you'll consider subscribing for more. Don't worry, subscribing is completely free, but it really helps to grow the channel. If you'd like to help support what I do, then please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.